get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
employee
piece
success.
of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hi, and welcome to another episode of In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman, and today we're going to talk quite a bit about OpenShift. So we're talking, of course, about the cloud in general, but coming from Red Hat, OpenShift really is the solution for hybrid cloud. And to be honest, one of the big reasons why IBM made the acquisition of Red Hat. And last night, actually, IBM had its fourth quarter 2022 earnings report, and there was an exciting announcement. The CFO of IBM, Jim Kavanaugh, actually, and I'll read you the quote: OpenShift, our industry-leading hybrid cloud platform, now has $1 billion in annual recurring revenue. So I can tell you from the Red Hat side, we are all pretty excited about this. When I joined Red Hat a little over 2 years ago, it was something that absolutely I saw the momentum and the product solution that Red Hat put in place. Saw that we could reach this milestone, but want to say huge kudos, not just to the team, as our head of products, Ashesh Badani, put out on social media. He said, hey, congratulations to all the current team members, the previous team members, and of course a special shout out not only to the customers but the community, because everything that we do at Red Hat and at OpenShift is open source based. So the community is so important to build what we've done, the momentum that has gotten us to where we are, and I think we have a really exciting future going forward. Since we are talking about OpenShift, it was awesome timing. Happy to welcome in our guest for the show today, Ju Lim. She is a senior manager from the product management team, part of the OpenShift group. Ju and I have actually worked together a couple of times, so thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. Delighted
so
to be here.
Ju, if we could, before we get into all the goodness of OpenShift 4.12, give the audience, if you would, a little bit of your background, and what brought you to Red Hat and actually brought you back to Red Hat.
Oh, that's a great question. So back when I worked with Stu, this was probably about a decade ago. We met up at EMC, and I was lured to join Red Hat by somebody I'd worked with at EMC who actually joined Red Hat. And it was sort of the promise to work on open source and change the world. And fast forward to today, I've been with Red Hat now about 7 years. And it's been very exciting. The company has evolved from RHEL, which was our bedrock and still remains. And I got to be lucky enough to be part of that containers and Kubernetes journey that's evolved into what's OpenShift today. And so it's been a wild ride, very exciting, a lot of changes. The company's grown from less than 10,000 people when I started to well over 20,000 some odd people. During that time, I did leave Red Hat for a time, for about 2 years, where I joined AWS. And that was also a very fun and exciting ride because I got to see things from an hyperscaler perspective. Part of the reason I left was to gain an appreciation for how hyperscalers are so successful in running public clouds, and get sort of a first-hand experience with operating first in the cloud, in what that entails in terms of what Amazon calls their mechanisms, and how do you go from an idea to productization in a number of different services. It was a very exciting and thrilling ride, I would say, but I'm really glad to be back at Red Hat, to have the freedom to work on open source again, and help shape the world.
Yeah, so some great background there, Drew. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd worked a bit on open source when I was at EMC. Always really enjoyed my interactions with Red Hat back from the earliest days when RHEL first came out, and just great culture, great people, and of course the open source mission is what brought a lot of us on board. So we've got quite a few sprinkled in from the EMC and VMwares of the world here at Red Hat. You were the lead, one of the leads for OpenShift 4.12. We've had on this show for last year, basically every time we've done a release, I bring on the product manager who leads it as way of a preamble. We know it takes a lot of people to put together all of these releases. There are so many things that go into OpenShift. I've talked about it, and we'll put the note out there. We do a whole live stream where the product management team goes through, a majority of all the things in there, and it's a really deep dive. So many different components that make up OpenShift, way more than we can cover here. But Drew, maybe if we start, a lot of the things that get the top mention are some of the customer enhancements that go into each release. So if you could give us, some of, your personal, the customer enhancements, the highlights, 4.12, what should people be looking at as some of the big pieces there?
Yeah, so I think 412, as you've mentioned, a lot of different people, a lot of different teams have worked on it. And I'm pleased to say we brought about, I want to say, somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 50 enhancements requests delivered. But some of the highlights in there that I should probably mention include things like the extending the OpenShift lifecycle for the extended update releases. In particular, our extended update releases tend to be even numbered, so things like 410, 412, and so on. But specific to extending the release, what up until recently, each OpenShift release was supported for 18 months. Starting from the 412 release onwards, we're changing it so that starting with OpenShift 412, we are now extending the total life cycle to 24 months. And this is really for the x86 architectures. If you have other architectures like Power or Z systems, or those still remain at 18 months. However, we're reviewing those architectures and will likely expand that over time. And so that has been requested by a lot of customers, primarily in the regulated industries where they have challenges with making changes very rapidly. And as you probably know, OpenShift is based on our upstream Kubernetes releases, and those change, I want to say, about 3 or 4 times a year, and we keep on track with them with each of our releases. However, we found customers very reluctant to upgrade. And so with all these extended update releases, this provides them a more supportable way of moving forward.
Drew, I wonder, I'd love to get your opinion on this, because it's a dynamic we've seen for a long time. If you ask many enterprise companies, how often they want to update, it's, well, if I've got it testing and it's working, I want to leave it that way. And the original promise of the cloud would be, hey, I used to joke, it's like, you don't think about what version of something you're running in Azure. You're just running on Azure, and Microsoft takes care of that. Now, the devil is in the details, because in Kubernetes, we see, the cloud providers are supporting more than one version out there, and we know customers need time to be able to upgrade. So we're hoping there's a little bit of convergence. You understand there's a lot of, it depends, and if I've got certain requirements, I need to keep it. But what are you seeing at that macro trend? We need to support longer, but we also want them to be able to take advantage of the newer things. And, you should be more secure and have more functionality if you're on the newer versions. How do we balance that?
That's a really, really good question. It is a careful balance. It does require customers and partners to really plan how they go about doing the upgrades. We've made tremendous strides in terms of offering things like EUS to EUS release updates. So that way you're able to skip a release for your worker nodes. We've also invested significantly to make your upgrades safer by minimizing downtime. We've introduced things like conditional edges so that if there are any kind of risks that we observe within your environment, we'll warn you against it. Upgrades, I mean. But the idea behind all of this is we know that upgrades are, nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to make those updates. But it is a necessary evil, especially if you're looking for newer features, new functionality. That's one. Or also you're dealing with CVEs or, it needs to get patched. Let's face it, we don't like it, but we have to do it. That being said, is we've made significant investments to ensure that upgrades are minimally intrusive in that sense by reducing the duration, and it's safer and quicker with what we've done. I think one of the things that has been a good comfort to me is that I recall speaking with a customer last year, and they also said, your upgrades are getting better, especially with all these new features you've introduced, so much so that we now actually do our upgrades during the work week. We no longer wait till the weekends to do it. And that came from a financial customer. So I felt really good about hearing things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I know you push personally your team really close to the installers, and I'm sure things like the upgrades. That flexibility that we've been building out, we're trying to make it simpler. People often, we know, Kubernetes is not easy, and there's a lot of things that go into OpenShift. So maybe if you could talk a little bit to how we've been progressing along that journey, and if there's anything specific in 4.12 that helps that overall story.
Yeah, so on the installation front, there's a lot of new changes that we've introduced. And what I mean by that is we've introduced more flexibility with our installer. And what that means is we now have the capability to actually disable some of the operators from being installed. And you can actually learn more about it. We call this the composable OpenShift. And so the idea behind this is there's been increasing desire from our customers and partners to actually have more flexibility in their installation. And what this means is, or I should say, what some of the drivers are sort of the newer footprints that we've introduced, like single node OpenShift or the Red Hat Device Edge, which is our production grade Kubernetes at the far edge. And these are just examples of smaller footprints. But when you deliver new footprints that address different use cases of being in maybe sort of a more rugged environment or a telecommunications closet, you need smaller footprints. What ends up happening is you need less resources for that. And as part of that, we need to also reduce the consumption being used by some of the OpenShift components. So we've made a lot of investments there and are continually improving and optimizing OpenShift. But as part of it, we're also, like I said, letting you exclude some of the components at installation time. And in the 4.12 release, we've actually introduce the ability to disable things like the console operator, the insights operator, the cluster storage operator, and the clusters CSI snapshot controller operator. And then on top of that, we've also introduced things like the agent-based installer, and this allows you, if you've got a air-gapped or disconnected scenario, we're now making it a lot easier to deploy OpenShift in those environments. And compared with previous where you needed an extra node or a bootstrap node, what the agent-based installer lets you do is actually install on all the supported topologies, whether it's a standard high availability cluster or a compact 3-node cluster or a single node OpenShift cluster. you have the ability to do that with the agent-based installer for air gaps or disconnected environments. And this has been optimized specifically for that scenario. And it's used primarily on premises for bare metal or vSphere, or what we call the agnostic platforms, where if, for example, we've not tested certain hardware or certain platforms, you have the ability to actually use this installer to install onto it. And that's something that we fully support through our third-party policy. Beyond that, other exciting things that we've done is extending to the edge with things like supporting AWS local zones.
Yeah, Ju, actually, hold on one second. I just want to say, first of all, on the installer, so awesome. So many times in this space, you look at offerings out there and it's, do I choose something that's really simple or do I choose something that is flexible? I know I talked with lots of customers. The difference between OpenShift 3 and OpenShift 4 was practically a different product. What we often lose over time is OpenShift 4 today on 4.12 is very different from OpenShift 4, going back a year or 2 years ago. But what I love is the flexibility we've built in there to hopefully make things easier, make things more flexible, give the customers what they need today and allow them to take advantage of new technology. So, just a reminder, if you're familiar with it, as Ju said, the upgrades are becoming even easier. It's becoming simpler. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into that. So many things. You really explained it, phenomenally, and I know you and your team have done a lot of great work to help enable those. And I'm glad you teed up. This show is in the cloud, so we absolutely want to talk about cloud. So when we talk about the hybrid solution that we have, a lot of that now is working on the solutions that we have with our hyperscaler partners. So last year we talked a little bit about Azure Stack Hub and how we're supporting OpenShift on it. And so why don't you bring us up to date with the AWS enhancements that we have in 4.12?
Right. So yeah, I might have jumped the gun there. But,
you're so excited to get into it. I mean, and I'm excited too. Local zones and outposts. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I first off, I should say this is not the only exciting enhancements we're delivering for clouds. We're doing things like shared VPC support in Google Cloud Platform and Azure. There's some other features, but going back to your question around AWS, very often we're hearing customers and partners wanting to deliver low latency applications or latency sensitive applications closer to their end users. And usually what that means is having some level of support for having something like an AWS Outpost if they're using AWS. And so now you're able to provision OpenShift to take advantage of Outposts. And what that means is you're going to be able to take advantage of all the same APIs like you do in the AWS regions while using your compute and storage at the edge. And so now what ends up happening is your control planes are still running in the regions, but when you actually deploy onto Outposts, your workers or their edge-based workers now are running on Outposts. And then in the case of local zones, what that means, we're also extending the workers to the edge with the use of local zones. And so definitely take a look at our documentation and release notes. I'll go into more detail, but
Yeah.
I know.
Again, make sure I'm understanding this. So we've spent a couple of years building out really the edge solutions for OpenShift. So first you get a cluster that I got down to a certain footprint, but one of the big enhancements we had, I think it was might have been almost 2 years ago, was to be able to have remote worker nodes where you have the control plane running one location, but the worker node could run but still have connectivity back to the control plane. So it's just taking that architecture, which could have been in a customer's data center, hosted data center, or in the cloud, and now we're leveraging, mapping on top of that hybrid environment. So if I have AWS, local zones, which are, some kind of localized data center, or outposts, which is in a customer's data center. That's where those remote worker nodes live. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so local zones are more like having local subnets that you're taking advantage, and you're extending your VPCs to take advantage of those local zones. But fundamentally, with both our support for local zones and outposts, um, basically it's exactly true, or very similar to the remote worker node concept that you mentioned, that when you're actually deploying to the edge in these two scenarios, you're basically putting a remote worker node into either a local zone or into an outpost.
Awesome. Hey, we do have a couple of questions coming in from our audience. First one, is 4.12 stable to install?
Absolutely. When we released OpenShift 4.12, and it released on January 17th, that is a GA and fully supported version of OpenShift. Like all versions, before we actually release anything to GA, we make early candidates available so that when you actually download it, it'll actually say EC if it's an early candidate. But if you don't see that, and we've officially released notes and documentation and actually listed it. It is fully stable and ready for production use.
Awesome. Yeah. As you said, what's nice, when we did the live stream, it was just about ready to be released. In between when the live stream happened for what's new, in this, we are generally available. So absolutely, it's there. It's GA. Go forth. There's some other questions, but I want to let you. I know there's way more features than we're going to get to on this one, but if there's a couple others that you want to talk specifically about, go ahead.
I think some of the highlights in particular with 4.12 are around security. And the reason I bring this up is it is based on Kubernetes 1.25, which seemed, if you look at all the features they mentioned, are very much security oriented. But in particular to 4.12, there are some exciting new operators that we've either introduced or made updates to. In particular is the security profiles operator, and this lets your users more easily distribute and use security profiles like SecCom or SE Linux in a Kubernetes cluster. And previously you had to manually deploy these, and now we've got a bundled operator, for lack of better words, that makes it a lot easier to deploy, but also to manage all the profiles related to it. And what this actually does is it gives the necessary privileges to the container processes. So that's why that one's important. And then the other one that's really exciting also is around our compliance operator. We've made some enhancements to make running compliance scans, or which also provides remediations for issues found. And what we've added to it is that administrators have better controls on prioritization of which pods get to run first. And so this way you can ensure that your scans are timely, you get your results, and you can ensure your compliance in a timely manner. I think one of the more exciting ones is the ingress node firewall operator. And we've had administrators, or I should say customers and partners, ask about being able to control the traffic to and from the interfaces, as well as the hosts that actually talk to the Kubernetes API server, and needing to control that. And so now we've just added that capability. And then on top of that, just to kind of make it more sort of icing on the cake, if you will, is our network observability operator. While it's not specific to security, this is sort of a core to actually being able to observe, monitor, trace, and actually manage your network. And so with this, now you can actually identify bottlenecks or troubleshoot connectivity issues. And I know any OpenShift administrator or user is going to find this really handy, especially when you're trying to find that performance issue that you've been chasing. So these are just some of the exciting features.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Of course, we talk about security in almost every episode because you can't have a discussion on what's going on in the cloud without that. Couple quick plugs to mention. KubeCon, one of the big shows that we go to. I've been to many times. Next week, there's actually for the first time an independent show called Cloud Native Security Con. The Red Hat team will be there. We've got product managers and technical marketing people all going to be there. So if you're going to be in Seattle, definitely check that out. Also, we'll put up in the chat. There's one of our other live stream shows called the Secure Cloudcast. So Mike Foster and Kim Carlos do that. They just had an episode this week. So be sure if you want to learn even more about security that's happening in this space, check out those playlists. I believe that one's run once a month. Some really good in-depth topics from a security standpoint. Yeah, and Ju, from my standpoint, when I'm talking to our customers, security, one of the top issues they all have, of course, and it's also one of the big reasons why people turn to Red Hat. We've got decades of experience into making open source secure to be consumed. And as we talked about, when it comes to upgrades, yes, it's best if you can be on the latest version, but we backport a lot of our fixes as much as we can to allow that to happen. So, Ju, there's a question, we'll throw it up here, and if it's something you can answer, great. If not, we can do some follow-up. But they asked about performance, something I get every once in a while. But, from release to release, how do we look at performance? They specifically asked if there was impact on using OVN Kubernetes versus OpenShift SDN. So, if you can handle that specifically, or generally, it's one of those tough things because we're software. There's infrastructure underneath it that impacts it and configuration. So, I know from my networking background, there's always so many different factors on there. But we'll throw up the performance question for you.
I don't have an answer on that per se, but I can tell you that I know there has been a lot of interest around performance related to OVN Kubernetes versus the traditional OVS networking on OpenShift. But what I will tell you is with OVN, it's been in tech preview for quite some time now, for actually a number of releases. And before we actually made a decision to actually get it to GA in 4.12, because we've actually made it the default SDN for 4.12 going forward, especially for new installs. We invested a lot of time into our performance and scalability testing. And what we did do was to ensure that what you could do in the previous OVS is something that you can also do in OVN. We've also made it possible to do additional security related things, so it's more secure. But from a performance wise, it's also enabling us to reach new limits, or I shouldn't say new limits, new heights that we haven't previously attained. Having stated that, I would probably defer folks to look at our performance and scalability guidelines in our release documentation. But if there's something in particular, the gentleman or person who asked about it, I'd be happy to chase this down and get more information or connect you to our product manager responsible for that capability.
Awesome. Phenomenal. Yeah. And it's so funny, Ju, what we talked about at the beginning, there's so many things that go into it. When I talk to customers these days, we throw up all these various projects that we're involved in. There's always new things coming down the pike. My disclaimer is like, look, I look through one of these releases. There's often a third to half of them that I don't know much about, other than hopefully I've heard of the project or or what we're doing. But there's so many things, and that's why it's awesome. We've got such a team involved, at the project level, at the product level, and everything we do. So we've got a little bit more time left. If there's some other kind of key highlights in 4.12 that you want to do, otherwise I do have one or two questions for you before we wrap. Once we're through some of the main pieces, and of course we've already put in there, some of the places people can follow up to read all of them when it comes to 4.12. Yeah.
So I think one of the things I wanted to highlight when we were talking about installer and the cloud is in 4.12 in Tech Preview, we've introduced a capability to install OpenShift onto Google Cloud Platform into a shared VPC. While it's technology preview, the reason I bring it up is if you're thinking about it, traditionally we've told customers they had to use our full control method of user provision infrastructure. Well, in 4.12, I'm happy to say we're actually going to let people do this through our full stack automation method of installer provision infrastructure or IPI to actually do this. So instead of having to that sort of complex process to actually configure it, we're making it easier. And so right now it's in tech preview, and obviously we're going to make this available in upcoming releases. Another exciting installer change that we've made recently is that you now can install OpenShift on Nutanix using our hosted assisted installer. And so now you have a web-based experience to actually deploy onto Nutanix, so it's a lot easier. So these are just some of the exciting changes. One of the other things that's also interesting to mention that people don't typically think about is running Windows workloads. And you can now run Windows workloads in Google Cloud also with OpenShift running on GCP. So these are just some of the exciting things.
And for those Windows workloads, is that Windows containers that we're doing, or something else?
You're right. Sorry,
Yeah.
I should say Windows containers workload.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's awesome, because I know, like, generally Windows container support, I know there were a lot of caveats when it first came out about, like, you had to be on the latest version of everything in Windows, and I heard a lot of customers were interested but didn't have there. And while it was supported in OpenShift, getting it supported in the cloud, has been a little bit challenging. So yeah, are we starting to see some real world adoption now of Windows containers?
We are seeing a lot of interest, and we're starting to see some adoption, and that's why you're starting to see that we're expanding our coverage into the cloud, and so that's why you're seeing it on GCP. In terms of adoption, I can't speak to the adoption myself, but I know we've had tremendous interest on this front, and we're actually looking to expand our footprint there.
Yeah. So awesome. Thank you. And again, there's way more people should learn about 4.12. Definitely, you can take a look. One of the things I find kind of helpful is there are often things that, the dot releases that happen add little pieces, but you need to almost look back in aggregate to be like, oh, well, we just talked about, a piece of the Windows container story. And it's like, I remember back when Windows containers first got supported in OpenShift, and now it's like, little bit. Now you like look at the whole totality of what happened there. I expect you've got a pretty good viewpoint, because you spent a couple of years outside of Red Hat, probably heard certain things about how people thought about OpenShift, or even from when you left Red Hat to when you came back, OpenShift changed a lot. So, what would you what would you mention, or what observations have you had about how OpenShift here in 2023, that if I haven't looked at it in a while, or if I had some kind of preconceived notions about how Red Hat did things, that maybe we should be like, hey, look, this is completely changed, or something that might have been a weakness is now a strength before?
Well, I think it's a good question. If you think about OpenShift, our unique offering here is that we target the open hybrid cloud across the physical, the virtual, the bare metal, the cloud. whether it's private or public, and now to the edge, and also starting to expand into the far edge. I don't know that there's any other offering out there that has as diverse and as wide a coverage as we do. I truly believe that. And I think one of our, when I left, we were much smaller than we are today. And also what we covered platform-wise, even though we have this great dream for a hybrid cloud platform, which is much smaller. Today, we're on all the major hyperscalers, where we have such deep coverage and wide coverage that it's almost near impossible for anyone to sort of catch up in a sense. And what I mean by that is, if you're only doing a single Kubernetes, it's easy. There's a lot of choices out there. But I have yet to meet a customer, an enterprise customer, that doesn't tell me that they don't have a multi-cloud approach. And the reason I say that is very often there's going to be some restrictions that say I need to keep some of the things on premises. And I think that's why, you know, um, AWS delivered something like the local zones or outposts, because they know that customers have sovereignty or regulations that require them to keep the data or their applications running on premises, or they have low latency requirements requiring that. These are just some examples, but if you think about it, the private cloud will always be there. The public cloud also will always be there. And there, for as long as I've lived, there are still mainframes today, and there's still a lot of virtualization out there. So it's a very mixed and very diverse set of requirements that people have. And for that very reason, the multi-cloud and hybrid is going to be here for a very long time to come. And that being said, OpenShift does really well in those environments by providing a single platform for actually building, delivering, operating, and managing applications across all of this without having to relearn for yet a different variant of it. And so that's probably, I think, where we shine the best, and where we see a lot of interest. And today, what, when I left Red Hat the first time, what I noticed is, we had a lot of it was sort of OpenShift, and we had Ansible, we had our middleware portfolio. We just had a lot of different pieces that were not as well integrated. And if you look at where we are today, everything sort of centers around OpenShift, and it bridges the gaps, if you will, into all these other areas. So, for example, we have the capability to have Ansible work together, and it's better together with OpenShift. You can write operators in Ansible. You can make calls to Ansible if you need to cover last mile automation for doing your full end-to-end provisioning of your applications. You have also serverless. So sometimes I have customers ask me, what comes after containers? And so we also have a lot of folks looking at serverless with our OpenShift serverless. And now we have support for things like Quarkus on it. And then beyond those areas, I also think about the sort of more futuristic things that we're looking at. And granted, a lot of them are still in the communities or projects, but there are new exciting things like, I was looking the other day at Project Kepler. This is a project that we're doing on sustainability, because we've had people ask, what's Red Hat doing about sustainability? And if you look at our press releases, we've actually announced that we're going to move towards being carbon neutral, or net zero, I should say, by 2030, if I'm not mistaken. There's a report on it.
Yep.
But why I'm bringing this up is that we have customers and partners asking us, what are we doing about it? And so we're actually investing in those areas. And while today it's not in OpenShift 4.12, in the future, we're going to start to see some of those exciting capabilities brought into OpenShift. And what's interesting about Kepler is they're taking some of the power consumption measurements and inferencing for covering some of the measurements that they're not able to but have to infer, and actually using that to make recommendations on how the vertical pod autoscaler should actually dynamically rescale or move workloads, if you will. So these are, looking further out, what's exciting about what we're doing with OpenShift. But I think I've kind of gone a little off topic here.
No, Drew, that was perfect actually to look a little bit going forward. So we actually put up in the chat first the hybrid discussion. I worked on an ebook back in 2021. So cloud.redhat.com/hybrid. People too often get caught up on the terminology. Oh, am I hybrid? Am I multi-cloud? How do I do this? The reality is IT by its very nature is additive. As you said, I always joke, almost nothing ever dies in IT. We need to be able to change and get rid of things, but the breadth and the depth of our offering and our customer experience that we have is unmatched in this industry. It's one of the things that brought me to Red Hat is all of the real customers that shared what they've done, the journey that they've been on. I'm actually super excited. I'm going to be hosting a panel of customers at Red Hat Summit in May to talk about some of the real things that they've done and how OpenShift, not just that they chose OpenShift because it's great, but the impact that it's had on their business and how they can help to over time transform their applications, and that has direct impacts on their customer experience, their employee experience. But you laid out, Drew, so nicely. There's so much more work that we have left to do. So, I started off the discussion about the $1 billion that we've reached. What's really interesting on the inside is when I hear the product managers and the engineers almost like, oh, we've got so many challenges and so many things on our plate. It's like, we've come so far on the journey and we've done awesome, but we will continue to focus, back here, Amazon calls it the customer obsessive, but, we are not comfortable with where we are. There's so much more that we want to be able to do in the product and with our customers to make those products. So with that, Drew, I think this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on to share everything that we had in 4.12. And so please, congratulations to the whole team. And we look forward to hearing, our customers' feedback as they continue their journey.
Thank you.
Right. So we'll be back. We've got, if you go to red.ht/live streaming, you can see all of the Red Hat live streams as well as, what we have with this show. I will be back with 2 weeks. We've got a great external guest talk about kind of the future of cloud and where we're going. Andy Mann is scheduled for that. I'm working on some really exciting guests that we've got in the coming weeks. So try to make it every 2 weeks. I've got a little bit of travel that might switch things by a week or two. So be sure to check either the YouTube playlist for In the Clouds or that live streaming website for all of the updates that we have. In the meantime, please feel free, as always, reach out, give us your feedback. Love to hear any themes, topics, guests that you would like us to cover in coming episodes. Do check out, if you go to Cloud Native Security Con, registration is open for Red Hat Summit. Just redhat.com/summit. You can find out lots of what's going on. It's in Boston at the big convention center. We're expecting to be back, really a full in-person event. So hope many of you can join us in Boston for that. So until next time, I'm Stu Miniman, and thank you as always for joining us on your journey in the clouds.